They found me on the front page of the newspaper, not the local paper, the national one. My son was eating breakfast when he saw my face staring back at him from the table. My daughter-in-law said he dropped his coffee mug and it shattered on the kitchen floor. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it later, and I won't lie. I smiled. Let me tell you how I got there. My name is Gerald. I'm 67 years old. For 38 years, I ran a small but successful plumbing supply company in Columbus, Ohio. Nothing glamorous. I drove a used truck for most of those years, reinvested everything back into the business, paid my employees well, and came home smelling like copper fittings and rubber gaskets. My wife Carol never complained once. She said she could tell an honest man by the way he smelled after work. She passed 11 years ago from a stroke, and not a single day goes by that I don't think about what she would say if she could see what happened to me. We had 2 children. My son Derek is 41. My daughter, Pamela, is 38. Carol and I gave them everything we reasonably could, not in a spoiling way, but in the way parents do when they work hard and want their kids to have it a little easier than they did. Derek went to Ohio State. Pamela got 2 years of community college before she decided she wanted to open a boutique, which I helped fund. I didn't ask for anything back. That's not why I did it. I did it because I loved them, and because Carol would have wanted me to. After Carol died, I kept working. The grief was heavy, but the routine helped. Derek had married a woman named Stacy by then, and they had a house in a suburb called Worthington, about 20 minutes from me. Pamela had married a man named Troy, who I never fully warmed to but tolerated for her sake. They lived closer, maybe 10 minutes away. I saw both families on holidays, sometimes more. I thought we were close. I thought that's what we were. The trouble started, looking back, about 2 years after Carol passed. That's when the questions began. Subtle at first, Derek asking how the business was doing, whether I'd thought about retirement, whether I had a financial advisor. I told him yes, I had an advisor, a good one named Phil, who'd helped me for 15 years. Derek said Phil sounded old-fashioned, that there were better options now, smarter ways to manage what I'd built. I didn't think much of it. He worked in finance. I figured he was just being helpful. Then Pamela started. Her boutique had struggled for a couple of years, and Troy's construction business had run into some problems I didn't fully understand. She came to me one Sunday and asked very gently whether I had updated my will recently. I told her it was in order. She nodded and said she was only asking because she cared about me, that she wanted to make sure everything was clear for when the time came. I told her I was 65 and healthy, and she shouldn't be so morbid. She laughed it off. But she brought it up again 2 months later, and then again at Thanksgiving. By the following spring, both of them were bringing it up together. I remember sitting at Derek's dining room table and realizing, for the first time, that they had coordinated. They had the same language, the same talking points. Derek talked about tax efficiency. Pamela talked about family stability. Stacy sat quietly and looked at her hands. Troy was not there that night, which I found odd. Afterward, driving home alone, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger yet, just a recognition, the kind a man gets when he's run a business long enough to know when someone's negotiating with him. I didn't say anything. I kept the feeling to myself and watched. The following October, Derek called me with an idea. He said he and Pamela had been talking, and they thought it would be wonderful to take a trip together. A real family trip, something we hadn't done since the kids were young. He mentioned a resort in Arizona, Sedona, specifically. He said the scenery was extraordinary, that there were hiking trails and spa facilities and excellent restaurants. He said it would be good for me, that I worked too hard and deserved a real rest. He said he'd handle all the arrangements. I want you to understand something. I am not a naive man. I have negotiated contracts, managed difficult employees, dealt with suppliers who tried to cheat me. I know what people look like when they want something, and yet, and I say this not to excuse myself, but to be honest, when your own children invite you on a vacation and tell you they want to spend time with you, Something in you wants to believe it. Something in you needs to believe it. I am not ashamed of that. I think it's simply what it means to be a father. I said yes. We drove to the Columbus airport together in Derek's SUV, which I remember thinking was a good sign. The togetherness of it, everyone in one vehicle. Pamela and Troy met us there. The flight to Phoenix was fine. Derek sat next to me and we talked about baseball for most of it, the way we used to when he was a teenager. I felt, for those 2 hours, genuinely happy. The resort was beautiful. Red rock formations everywhere you looked, the kind of landscape that makes you feel small in a good way. Our first evening we had dinner on an outdoor terrace, and the sunset turned everything orange and pink. Pamela took a photograph of me with both of them, and I saved it to my phone. I looked at it later in my room and thought, this is good. This is what Carol would have wanted. The trouble began on the second day. After breakfast, Derek suggested we take a drive to a canyon overlook about 40 minutes away. He said the views were unlike anything, that we absolutely had to see it. Pamela said she and Troy were going to stay at the resort. Spa appointments they'd already booked. Derek said it would just be the two of us, father and son, like old times. I remember feeling touched by that. We drove out to the overlook. It was genuinely stunning. A wide canyon, deep red walls, a hawk circling below us. We stood there for a while without talking, which I appreciated. Then Derek said he wanted to show me something. He pulled out an envelope from his jacket. Inside were papers. Legal papers. I recognized the format. I'd signed enough contracts in my life to know what a document transfer looks like. He had highlighted the signature lines in yellow. He said he'd had his attorney draw them up, that it was simply a restructuring, a way to move certain business assets into a family trust that would protect them from estate taxes. He said Phil, my advisor, was too conservative, that this was what smart families did. He said Pamela had already agreed. I stood there at the edge of that canyon and looked at my son. I asked him if he had brought legal documents on a family vacation. He said he thought the setting would be relaxing, that it would feel less like business and more like a conversation between family. I told him I would not be signing anything without my own attorney reviewing it. He pushed back, not aggressively but steadily. He used words like urgency and opportunity and protection. I kept saying no. We drove back to the resort mostly in silence. That cold feeling in my chest was back, but it was colder now. That evening, I tried to talk to Pamela alone. I found her by the pool after dinner. I told her Derek had shown me the papers. She didn't look surprised. She said she agreed with Derek, that it was the right thing for the family, that I was being stubborn, that I always made things harder than they needed to be. I asked her when she had started talking about me that way. Stubborn, harder than they need to be. She said she was just being honest. I went back to my room and called Phil. It was late in Columbus, but he picked up, as he always did. I described the documents to him as best I could from memory. He was quiet for a moment and then said slowly that what I was describing sounded like a mechanism to transfer controlling interest in the business to a third-party trust, which could then be managed by whoever was named trustee. I asked who would be named trustee. I told him Derek's name was on the document. Phil said he would strongly advise me not to sign anything until he had reviewed it in full. I slept badly that night. The next morning at breakfast, the mood was different. Derek was quieter than usual. Stacy was friendly in an overly bright way that felt rehearsed. Pamela barely looked at me. Troy ate methodically and said very little, which was, in fairness, not unusual for him. Derek proposed a visit to a historic site about an hour outside of town. He said there was an old trading post, a museum, a small town worth walking around. He said we could make a day of it. I agreed. I don't know fully why I agreed. Maybe I wanted to believe there was still a chance the trip could be salvaged. Maybe I simply wasn't ready to believe the conclusion my mind was forming. We drove out in 2 cars. I rode with Derek and Stacy. Pamela and Troy followed. The town was charming. Adobe buildings, turquoise jewelry in the shop windows, a good smell of fry bread coming from somewhere. We walked around for a couple of hours. For a while, it felt normal. Derek bought me a coffee at a small cafe, and we sat outside and watched people walk by. He seemed almost like himself. Around 2 in the afternoon, he said he wanted to show me a gallery a few streets over, that a friend had recommended it. He and Stacy walked ahead. Pamela and Troy said they were going back to browse the jewelry store we passed earlier. I said I'd catch up with Derek. I spent maybe 20 minutes in that gallery. Southwestern paintings, a few sculptures. A woman there told me about each piece with genuine enthusiasm, and I listened because I found I liked the way she talked about them. I bought a small painting, a mesa at dusk, blues and reds, because Carol had always loved that kind of thing, and I thought I would hang it in the hallway where her portrait was. When I came back outside, Derek's car was gone. I walked back to where we parked. Both cars were gone. I took out my phone to call Derek. The call went to voicemail. I called Pamela. Same. I called Stacy. Voicemail. I sent texts. Nothing. I stood in the middle of that small Arizona street with a painting wrapped in brown paper under my arm. And I tried, genuinely tried, to find an innocent explanation. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe someone was sick. Maybe there was a miscommunication. They were looking for me somewhere else in town. I waited 45 minutes. No one came back. Here's what I want you to understand, because this is the part that people who have not experienced it will find hardest to believe. The confusion comes first, not the anger, not the grief, the confusion. Your brain simply refuses, at the cellular level, to accept what the evidence is telling you. These are your children. You changed their diapers. You sat up with them when they had fevers. You drove them to school and to games and to friends' houses. The idea that they would do this, drive away and leave you standing in an unfamiliar town without a word, the idea simply does not compute. And so you stand there trying to compute it, over and over, and failing. I eventually walked into a small restaurant and sat down. I ordered water and then coffee and tried to think clearly. My wallet had my driver's license and some cash. I had learned years ago to always keep cash in my front pocket, a habit from the early days of the business when I made cash deposits. I had my phone with a low battery. I did not know the name of the resort we were staying at. Derek had handled all the bookings. I did not know the address. I had a return flight to Columbus in 3 days, but the ticket was on Derek's phone. I was 66 years old, and I was stranded in a town in Arizona, and my children had driven away. The waitress, a young woman named Rosa, noticed that I'd been sitting for a long time. She asked if I was all right. I told her, honestly, that I was not. I told her because there was no point in not telling her that my family had apparently left without me. I said it matter-of-factly because that was the only way I could say it without my voice breaking. She sat down across from me without asking and said, "What do you need?" I have thought about Rosa many times since that day. She didn't know me. She had other tables. She didn't offer sympathy in a performative way or look at me with pity. She just asked what I needed and waited for an answer with complete practicality, like a person who understood that some situations required action before they required feeling. I told her I needed to find my hotel. She helped me search the resort name using my phone's remaining battery and a description of what I remembered. The Red Rock view, the outdoor terrace, the name starting with the letter A. We found it within 10 minutes. She called a local car service for me and waited until it arrived. I left her a $50 tip, which she tried to refuse, and I told her she would be doing me a disservice if she didn't take it. The drive back to the resort took 50 minutes. I used the time to think. By the time I walked into the lobby, I had made several decisions. The first was that I would not call my children again. If they wanted to reach me, they knew how. The second was that I would contact Phil first thing in the morning and begin the process of reviewing every document, every arrangement, every financial instrument connected to my business and estate. The third was that I would not leave Arizona on their schedule. I would leave on mine. The front desk staff were professional and kind. My room was still in Derek's name, but they confirmed I was a registered guest and gave me a new key. I went upstairs, plugged in my phone, and sat in the chair by the window looking out at the red rocks going dark in the evening light. I ordered room service. I ate slowly. I watched the last of the sunset. Derek called at 9:40 that evening. He said they'd had a family emergency, that Stacy's mother had called with a health crisis, that they'd had to leave immediately, that they were sorry, that they should have communicated better. He spoke quickly and smoothly, the way he used to talk his way out of things as a teenager. He said they'd booked me a flight home for the next morning. He said the resort was paid through the end of the week if I wanted to stay. I let him finish. Then I said, "Derek, I've been thinking about this for the last 4 hours. Don't insult both of us by continuing." He was quiet. I told him I would find my own way home, on my own schedule. I told him not to contact me again until I reached out first. Then I ended the call. I stayed in Sedona for 3 more days, alone. Those 3 days were not what you might expect. They were not miserable. The first morning, I woke up early and walked one of the easier trails before the heat came up, and I watched the light change on the rock faces and thought about Carol and about what she would have done. Carol was a practical woman and a forgiving one. But she had no patience for what she called organized cowardice. Her phrase for people who dressed up self-interest as something noble. She would have seen through Derek and Pamela long before I did. She always did see those things faster than me. I ate well. I read. I bought 2 more paintings from the gallery and had a long conversation with the woman who worked there. Her name was June, and she'd moved to Sedona 20 years ago from Michigan and had never looked back. She asked about the painting I'd bought the day before, and I told her it was for my wife's wall. She asked if my wife was waiting at home, and I told her, briefly, the truth. She said she was sorry. I said I was too, but that I'd had 11 good years of grieving, and I was mostly at peace with it. On my last evening, I sat on the terrace of a restaurant by myself and had a proper meal, steak, a glass of decent red wine, a slice of peach pie, and watched the other diners, the couples and families and groups of friends, and I did not feel sorry for myself. I felt something clearer than that. I felt decided. I flew home on a Thursday morning. I had rebooked my own ticket with miles I'd accumulated over 30 years of business travel. I took a cab from the airport to my house, unlocked my own front door, and stood in the hallway under Carol's portrait for a long time. Then I called Phil. What followed over the next 6 weeks was, in Phil's words, a thorough house cleaning. We went through everything: the business ownership structure, the estate documents, the beneficiary designations on my life insurance and retirement accounts. What we found was not criminal, but it was not innocent either. Derek had, over the previous 2 years, been in contact with my estate attorney on 3 separate occasions, an attorney I had trusted for 15 years, providing what he described as family input on document revisions. Those revisions had introduced language that would have given Derek significant influence over the management of my business assets in the event of my incapacitation. The changes were subtle enough that I might have signed them without fully understanding what I was agreeing to. I terminated my relationship with that attorney and retained a new one, a woman named Barbara who came highly recommended by Phil, and who, in our first meeting, used the word predatory in a way that was careful but unmistakable. I updated my will. I changed my beneficiary designations. I restructured the business ownership in a way that protected it entirely. I did not remove Derek and Pamela from my life in a single dramatic gesture. I simply built a wall, quietly and thoroughly, the way a man who has worked with his hands for 40 years knows how to build things. Solidly, without fanfare, designed to last. I did not contact them. They contacted me several times through October and into November. Derek left voicemails that started conciliatory and became frustrated. Pamela sent long text messages that alternated between apology and accusation. Troy called once, which surprised me, and said something about misunderstandings and family unity that I found both hollow and slightly rehearsed, as if he had practiced it. I did not respond to any of them. In November, I agreed to an interview. This requires some explanation. The previous year, I had quietly donated a significant sum, the details of which I won't go into, to a foundation that served elderly citizens who had been financially exploited by family members. I had made this donation anonymously after reading an article that stayed with me for months. The director of that foundation, a woman named Dr. Patricia Owens, had been trying to reach me for some time, because the donation had been large enough that she wanted to understand the donor's story. When she eventually tracked me down through Phil, I agreed to speak with her, still anonymously, about what I was learning about my own situation. What I did not fully anticipate was that Dr. Borby Owens was also working with a journalist, a reporter from a national publication, who was writing a long-form piece on financial exploitation of elderly parents by adult children. The phenomenon, apparently, was far more common than I had known. Dr. Owens asked if I would be willing to share my story as part of that piece, with my identity protected. I thought about it for 2 days. Then I said yes, but without the protection. I told her I wanted my name used. I was 67 years old, and I had built something with my own hands and my wife's partnership and 38 years of early mornings and honest dealings, and I was not going to be anonymous about what had been attempted. Dr. Owens said that was my right, but she wanted to make sure I understood what it meant. I understood. The piece was published on a Sunday morning in late November in both print and online editions. It was not primarily about me. I was one of several people interviewed, and the piece focused on the broader patterns, the legal mechanisms typically used, the warning signs that older adults and their advisors should watch for. But my story was in there, with my name, and with the specific details of the document Derek had produced at the canyon overlook in Arizona. Derek was eating breakfast when he saw it. His wife called Pamela, who called me 4 times in a row, then sent a text message in all capitals that I did not read until later that afternoon. Troy apparently called a mutual family friend we both knew, a man named Gary who had been close with Carol, and asked Gary to intervene on their behalf. Gary called me, and I told him what had happened, and Gary was quiet for a long time and then said, "Jerry, I'm sorry. I didn't know." I believed him. The response to the article was something I had not prepared for. Dr. Parable, Owens's organization, received several hundred contacts in the days following publication. People who had experienced similar situations. Family members seeking resources, financial and legal professionals looking to get involved. My own email, which Phil had listed in the piece as a point of contact for others in similar situations, received over 400 messages in the first week. I read every one of them. Some were from people my age who had gone through worse. A woman in Minnesota whose son had taken power of attorney and drained her savings account. A man in Florida who had been removed from his own home through a series of legal maneuvers he didn't understand until it was too late. A couple in Oregon whose adult children had forged their signatures on a property transfer. Reading those messages, I understood that what had happened to me, painful as it was, had stopped before it became those things. I had been lucky, and I had been stubborn, and I had Phil. Others were from adult children, who wrote to say they recognized themselves in the piece, not as perpetrators, but as people who had been watching a parent's finances anxiously and needed a different way to have that conversation. Those messages surprised me. They were harder to read, in some ways, because they required me to hold complexity. To understand that fear and grief about a parent's aging could twist into something ugly without the person fully knowing it was happening. I'm not sure I fully excuse what Derek and Pamela did, but I have tried, in the months since, to understand it. I have not resumed a normal relationship with either of my children. Derek and I spoke once, in December, at my initiative, a single conversation in which I told him clearly what I knew, what I had done in response, and what the terms of any future relationship would need to be. He was defensive at first, and then he cried, which I was not expecting. I didn't comfort him. I sat with him in the discomfort of what he had done. Pamela has not yet been willing to have that conversation. I expect she will eventually. I am willing to wait. In January, I hired a young man named Kevin to begin training as my eventual business successor. Kevin is 34, grew up in the same neighborhood I did, reminds me of myself at that age in ways that I find both flattering and slightly concerning. He is sharp and he works hard, and he doesn't take shortcuts. I told him on his first day that the only thing I would not tolerate was dishonesty, and that if he was ever in a situation where he felt he had to be dishonest with me, he should come tell me directly and we would figure it out together. He looked at me like he wasn't sure if I was serious. I told him I was absolutely serious. I have also, in the months since, become more involved with Dr. Owens's foundation. I sit on an advisory board now. I have given 2 talks to groups of older adults about the specific legal mechanisms used in elder financial exploitation and what to watch for. I am not a lawyer, and I'm careful to say so, but I am a man who has been through it and who can speak plainly about what it looks like from the inside. People seem to find that useful. There is one more thing I want to tell you, because it's the part I think about most. The night before the article was published, I was sitting in my house alone, and I took out the photograph Pamela had taken on that first evening in Sedona. The 3 of us on the terrace. The orange and pink sunset behind us. Everyone smiling. I looked at it for a long time. I looked at my own face in it. How happy I looked. How completely I had believed in that moment. I didn't delete it. I kept it. Because the happiness in that photograph was real. Even if the circumstances around it were not. I was happy because I was with my children, and I believed they wanted to be with me. That belief was wrong, but the love underneath it, my love, the love that generated that happiness, that was real. And I don't think a man should have to delete the real things just because they got tangled up with the false ones. Carol would have understood that, I think. She always had a better tolerance for complexity than I did. She would have kept the photograph too, and she probably would have put it in a drawer where she could find it, but didn't have to look at it every day. That seems about right to me. I hung the painting from the Sedona gallery in the hallway, next to Carol's portrait, the mesa dusk, blues and reds. It looks like it was always meant to be there. When people ask me now what I would tell someone in a similar situation, an older parent who suspects that something is wrong, that the conversations are a little too focused on money, that the invitations have a slight angle to them, I tell them the same thing every time. Trust what you already know. You have spent a lifetime reading people. You know the difference between someone who loves you and someone who wants something from you, even when those 2 people are the same person. You know it before you're willing to admit it. Trust the knowing, get a good advisor, and keep them close. And don't sign anything at a canyon. The last time I went to the cemetery, I sat by Carol's grave for a while and told her the whole story. The way I always do when something significant has happened. I told her about Sedona and the canyon and Rosa and June and the article and Dr. Owens and Kevin. I told her about the photograph and the painting. I told her I was okay. There was a hawk overhead circling slowly, the way they do in the thermals in the late afternoon. I don't believe in signs. I never have. But I sat there and watched it for a long time anyway, because it was beautiful and I was in no hurry, and because some things are just worth watching. I drove home in the October light, and I made dinner, and I ate it at my own table in my own house, and I was, for the first time in a long time, entirely at peace.